Trump is a cultural traditionalist. He does not want to overturn the very underpinnings, the basis of America, what's left of America as we know it. So, yeah, I guess I support Trump for those reasons. But from an economic point of view, with some exceptions, like as a businessman, he wants to cut domestic taxes. That's wonderful. He wants to cut domestic regulations. That's wonderful. But he's actually an economic ignoramus and threatening the world to put on a 100% tax on imports. It is so stupid, so dangerous, so destructive. I mean, it was tariffs that actually set off the last depression. And at this point, the United States is a consumer, not so much a producer. This is why we run, $800 billion, $1 trillion of trade deficits every year. And we've been running a gigantic trade deficit for the last 40 years. So he's just going to penalize the American people, and he could devastate the world economy. The dollar is a dead duck. Nobody wants to use the dollar anymore. It's crazy. When the Chinese trade with the Russians, they don't want to use rubles, which is a nothing currency. It's a piece of paper. They don't want to use yuan. The Russians don't trust that. So the dollar is the numeraire. It's not going to stay that way. The whole world wants to dump it because the unbacked liability of a bankrupt government. Worse than that, if you trade with dollars around the world, it all clears through New York, which is very dangerous now, as the Russians found recently. So it's too bad. The Donald is not only a super nationalist, he's a jingoist. He's better than Kamala, though. Who knows what she's going to do? Because, she said she hasn't changed her values. She's quite correct. One of the few things she said that wasn't a lie, because her values are those of a Marxist, of a communist. They really are. I'm not going overboard in saying that. We're going between Scylla and Charybdis in this election. The major export of the U.S. for the last 40 years, as I've said many times before, has not been soybeans or IBMs or Boeings. It's been dollars. So there's a huge overhang of tens of trillions of dollars outside the U.S. And they're like a time bomb. It rests on nothing but confidence. And so at some point, all these dollars in the hands of foreigners who don't have to use dollars. It's just convenient because everybody else uses dollars. They could dump them. But to whom? They'll come back to the United States in exchange for titles to land, companies, businesses. And at that point, the U.S. will, seeing that happening, will put on foreign exchange controls. I mean, the Donald could set that off. Quite frankly, a lack of faith in the dollar doing that type of thing. The world is going to gold, quite frankly. They can't trust each other's funny money currencies, and they can't trust the dollar. So that's why all the foreign central banks, they're basically idiots, but not totally. They've been buying gold. The best house on the block is actually gold. And people have forgotten that as late as 1933, everybody used gold to settle. You even had gold coins in your pocket to buy stuff down at the grocery store. So I think the world is going to go back to gold instead of using these fiat currencies that all the governments of the world print. How much gold is there in the world? Well, nobody knows. But the best guess at this point is there's about 7 billion ounces that have been mined since the dawn of history and are still available and above ground. And you see that gold is still a teeny-weeny asset class. I don't know what it's going to go to. In fact, I don't know if in the next few weeks or few months, gold doesn't go back down to $2,000 an ounce. Entirely possible. My suspicion is that if we talk a year from now, it's going to be well above 3,000. It's hard to say. That's a wild guess. I mean, nobody knows. It's unpredictable. What we do know, the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, all these other central banks are buying it because they want to get out of dollars. And people in the Orient especially are buying it as individuals. And at some point, I suspect you're going to find more people in the West deciding, maybe I should buy some too. As far as the United States is concerned, and all of the world's countries, government spending has to be radically reduced. Mm-hmm. I was talking to David Stockman the other day, and I said it must be about 80% of the U.S. budget is entitlements and things that you can't change, like the national debt, have to pay the interest on it. Trump has said we're not going to cut one penny from Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or any of that, these welfare payments. And the military, Trump wants to raise spending for the military, which is basically just a welfare program for big weapons companies at this point. It's crazy. It serves no useful purpose. So I said, it must take 80% of the budget is written in stone. He says, no. The answer is 91% of the budget you can't change. So all the other things, other than what I just mentioned of the U.S. budget, are from the remaining 9%. The government is bankrupt, completely and thoroughly bankrupt. The deficit that the government runs now, $2 trillion, moving on $3 trillion per year, they can't extract that in taxes at this point. They're printing up money. They've accepted what's known as modern monetary theory, which is basically government runs a deficit, you print the money via the Federal Reserve. So we're headed towards a real disaster. I've been saying this for years, of course, and the standard of living of the average American has been sinking for many years, held up by advances in technology, which is wonderful, and the fact that some people save, they produce more than they consume, and they save the difference. But most people have just been borrowing more, which means that they're either living off of the capital other people have saved in the past, or they're mortgaging their future, or both. So it's not going to end well. It cannot end well. It's not the government's province to build houses for people, especially the kind of people that are so irresponsible and drugged up and psychologically messed up that they have to live on the street. So the answer to the homeless problem is not take the money that is being laundered in the Ukraine and build crappy houses for damaged people to live in. That's not the answer. I hope that Kennedy doesn't think that. I hope it's just McConnell, who's a disaster. All of these people in Washington, I've got to say, they impress me as having basically criminal personalities. Why do I say they have criminal personalities? Because they really think they have a right to control the lives of other people, to take the money that other people, the capital, the wealth that other people create. And even if Trump reduces taxes, saying, yes, I agree, the money belongs in the people's pocket, not in the government's pocket. Okay, that's true. But you have to realize that even if the taxes in the U.S. went to zero, which would be a wonderful thing, and it was all just printed money, it's still a tax. Somebody's got to pay for the real wealth. The government has got to be cut back by 90%. You can start with 50%, but it's growing. It's not getting smaller, and it'll keep growing under Trump. It'll just grow in different ways. Who's going to be an utter and complete disaster? Trump will only be a partial disaster economically. The BRICS are not going to be able to put together a BRIC currency to replace the dollar because none of them trust each other, nor should they. So they can see that the West, North America, and Western Europe are a sinking ship. The governments are bankrupt. The citizens are overtaxed. Inflation, which is, you can't believe the government's numbers, quite frankly, is out of control and going to get much worse. So, of course, they want to have their own grouping, but they don't want to be in the orbit of the U.S. government anymore. It's dangerous. About the only thing the U.S. government has to offer is a massive military with 800 bases around the world, and they don't particularly like that. U.S. soldiers can appear anywhere, or the CIA, and do things which are unpleasant. So, of all the world's leaders, Putin is the most intelligent, has the best education, the most knowledge of history. In many ways, he's the most prudent. I think he made a mistake on the Ukraine, but he was pushed into it by the U.S. government. So I don't know where it's going to end. I just hope it doesn't end with World War III, because you can't back a country into a corner forever without expecting some type of a rebound, and then things can get out of control. Well, obviously, Ukraine, their army is on the ragged edge of collapse, and what I think is going to happen is the Russians will take the Donbass and the Crimea and leave Ukraine as a rump state. And hopefully that'll end there. The other thing is, of course, what's going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza, and of course with the Iranians and with Hezbollah. You don't know how that's going to end either, because when you look at Israel and the U.S., it's like a man and his dog. And sometimes the man kicks the dog and sometimes the dog bites the man. Of course, my solution to it is, the answer is the U.S. shouldn't be involved in it. It's not our fight. And the U.S. being involved in it can only aid in the thing spinning totally out of control and getting into a war with God knows who.
Yeah.
The U.S. is in back of the problems in the Ukraine. It's in back of the problems in Gaza. And as far as Taiwan's concerned with China, that's none of our business either, quite frankly. I wish the Taiwanese well and the Chinese people well, but not our problem. We could only make it worse. And who knows where the other place we might decide to stick our nose into. Someplace in Africa, quite possibly.